Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has just dropped out of the 2024 presidential election and endorsed former President Donald Trump, something that could skyrocket his chances of winning the presidency in November. Now, if you don't know, RFK Jr. has been polling at just under 5% in the last couple of weeks in national polling, which may seem insignificant. However, considering the fact that Harris has only been leading by roughly 3%, this 4.6% of the electorate could definitely decide who wins the presidency. There are several reasons why RFK Jr. dropping out of the presidential election and endorsing Trump would end up benefiting Donald Trump in this November. Firstly, RFK Jr., as you can see, is a former Democrat, and his decision to endorse former President Trump could end up swaying other more moderate Democrats to do the same. Additionally, in national polling, we have consistently seen that RFK Jr. splits more of the vote away from Donald Trump than Kamala Harris. For example, in two recent polls that were taken by RMG Research and Outward Intelligence, what we see is that Trump does about 2% better in the head-to-head matchup against Kamala Harris, down by 4 here and even, as opposed to running in a multi-way race. Kamala Harris is up 6 in this instance and up 2 in the other one. You can see that by RFK Jr. exiting the race, it could significantly benefit Donald Trump in the national popular vote and by and large the election. So in today's video, I will be examining the 2024 presidential election after this major development in favor of former President Trump. First off, Trump's safe states here would include the states of Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, the Dakotas, Montana, Nebraska's at-large vote, the 1st and 3rd congressional districts, as well as Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Missouri, and Indiana. These were all states that voted for Trump by at least 12% in 2020 that expect him to retain by safe margins in 2024. Additionally, the states of Alaska and South Carolina, I also expect to be in the safe column. I also have the state of Iowa, a traditionally very competitive state, in favor of Trump by a safe margin here. Now for Kamala Harris and her safe states, Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, DC, Maryland, Delaware, Connecticut, Vermont, as well as New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, as well as Maine's 1st congressional district, and the state of Illinois are all considered safe states for Kamala Harris. Those are not surprising, all those states voted for Joe Biden by at least 15% back in 2020. I do expect Kamala Harris's win margin in some of these safe blue states to end up decreasing. For example, in the Empire State, Joe Biden was able to win New York by roughly a 23% margin. However, in 2024, I expect that margin to decrease to around 15%, but nevertheless a safe characterization. I'm going to get the state of New Jersey out of the way. I believe it's going to be closer to around a 10% margin in favor of Kamala Harris, but it's not really going to be a very contested state. Now I'm going to give Donald Trump his likely states. Firstly, in Ohio, of course this would be a likely Republican state. Of course, former President Donald Trump carried the state by 8% back in 2020, and I expect that margin to increase to roughly 12% thanks to Donald Trump's increasing support in some of the rural areas of the state, as well as some of the more white working class regions like Mahoning County. Now, the next likely Republican state here will be the state of Florida, a state that was expected to go to Joe Biden according to polling, and as well as according to some of those pundits. Nevertheless, here the state actually voted for Donald Trump in 2020 by 3.3%, the best margin that a Republican has had in the state since the 2004 general election. As well as that, some of the more Hispanic portions of the state, including Miami-Dade County, a county that is about 10% of the state's population, that trended 22 points in favor of Donald Trump back in the 2020 election. I certainly expect the state of Florida to be in the likely Republican column. As well as that, I do have the state of Texas in the likely Republican column as well. This was a likely Republican state back in 2020. I expect Trump to make inroads in essentially all of the state, except potentially Houston, as well as some of the areas around Dallas. However, I expect President Trump to be able to offset any of those potential Democratic gains in Rio Grande Valley, as well as some of the rural areas. So Texas is definitely likely for Donald Trump. Now, Kamala Harris, she will carry the states of Colorado and New Mexico by likely margins. I'm not going to get into that, that's not very surprising. I also have the state of North Carolina here in the likely Republican column. This may be a surprise to some people, however, Donald Trump was able to carry the state over Joe Biden by 1.3%, despite the fact that Biden made significant improvements in some of the suburban areas. I believe Kamala Harris in its performances in some of the suburban areas, as well as some of the rural black communities up here, where a lot of farmers reside, as well as some of the Republican rural areas down here bordering South Carolina. I believe that these are all areas that Donald Trump will end up gaining, pushing Trump's margin in the statewide result to over 5%, which means North Carolina is also likely Republican. Now, the remaining states on this map, now main second, I'm going to get out of the way. This is going to be likely Republican. All the remaining states on this map will either be lean or tilt for either party. So I'm going to go in geographical order now, starting with the state of Nevada. Now, Nevada is a state that I expect Donald Trump to be heavily favored in the November election. If you currently look at the polling, you can see that Kamala Harris is up in the state by 0.7%. However, this number is incredibly misleading for several reasons. Firstly, it still includes Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s number, and as I've explained, after RFK Jr. has exited the race, most of those voters will probably end up going to Donald Trump because a lot of them are disaffected Republicans, like a type of Mitt Romney or John McCain Republican, who would end up holding their nose and voting for Donald Trump. Additionally, if you look at some of the polling averages here, you can see that Trump is leading in the vast majority of the polls. However, 4 polls by Focal Data essentially messed up the entire aggregate, so Trump is leading actually in the vast majority of polls in the state of Nevada. Additionally, trends have favored the Republican Party in Nevada, with Clark County, which is home to Las Vegas, a huge Hispanic population there, trending 1.4% more Republican than 2016, despite the fact that the nationwide average actually trending towards the Democratic Party, Joe Biden, by more than 2% compared to 2020. So the state of Nevada is indeed moving right, and the fact that Joe Biden only won the state by 2.4% is not particularly promising for the Democratic Party. I do have the state of Nevada right now going to the Republican Party by lean characterization. Now going to the state of Arizona, which could be pretty competitive in November. Currently speaking, Arizona has a margin of lead for Kamala Harris right now in polling by roughly 1.4%. Again, that still factors in Kennedy's numbers, which will probably be just a lot of moderate Republicans who are unsure who they're going to vote for. Again, I have explained most of those voters will probably end up backing Donald Trump, though some of them will, of course, still end up backing Kamala Harris. However, if you look at the 2020 polling era in the state, you can see that Joe Biden was expected to win the state by 2.6, and the fact is Joe Biden only won the state by 0.3%, which is about a 2.3% margin of error, showing the fact that some of these polls are simply not that credible. Additionally, if you look at the state of Arizona, there's a very moderate suburban population around Maricopa County, and by extension in Pima County. Now, the statewide vote itself, about 2/3 of the population, close to that, resides in Maricopa County, and if you combine Pima County and Maricopa, that is roughly 73% of the population. I did the math there. Now, what you see is that those areas, they're more moderate, kind of Republican-leaning areas that may have voted for Joe Biden, but I believe that at least some of those voters will end up backing Donald Trump in 2024, just because Kamala Harris is not someone who's deemed as more moderate, and her running mate is also but most certainly a progressive, and as a result, Arizona right now, I would definitely give it to Donald Trump by a tilt margin. It's still going to be very close, but it's a state that I do expect to go for Donald Trump. Now, the next state on this list here would be the state of Georgia. Georgia right now is pretty tight in polling if you look at the 2024 results. However, Donald Trump maintains a lead. Georgia polling historically has been pretty accurate, so it definitely is more competitive. However, if you look at some of the more recent polls, you can see that Trump maintains a pretty healthy lead in some of the more recent numbers, and as well as that, Kamala Harris simply, I don't think, will be able to appeal to a lot of those suburban white Americans, suburban white men with college degrees to the extent that Joe Biden did. Of course, Kamala Harris will still do better than someone like Hillary Clinton back in 2016, but I just do not believe that she'll be able to replicate Joe Biden's numbers in areas like Gwinnett County, Cobb County, right? These are areas that trended 12% more Democratic in just about a 4-year span. I believe there will be some type of suburban reversion, as well as Trump will increase some of his numbers in some of the more rural parts of the state. For example, in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district up here, as well as some of the more rural areas of the state of Georgia, to be able to win the state by about a 3 to 4% margin, like many polling indicators, as well as some of the other pundits, are expecting from the state of Georgia. Now going to Minnesota, this is Governor Tim Walz's home state. I do expect Kamala Harris to carry it. It's a state that voted for Biden by 7. I do not expect Kamala Harris to have quite the appeal that Joe Biden had in the state back in 2020. However, considering that Governor Tim Walz is on the ballot, I'm still going to give it to the Democratic Party by roughly a 4 to 5% margin. I'm going to move now to the state of Virginia, where there's quite an interesting phenomenon. Joe Biden carried the state of Virginia by roughly 10% back in 2020. It was the first time in around 4 to 5 decades for a Democratic Party to be able to carry the state by double digits. However, polling in this time round has shown this race to be incredibly tight, with Harris up by less than 3% in essentially all the recent polls that have been taken. In fact, Donald Trump was up in a couple of the more recent polls. Now, what happened here? Well, in 2020, Joe Biden had significant overperformances in a lot of the suburban areas across the state. For example, Virginia Beach, right? This is one of the largest population centers in the state of Virginia. The county voted for Trump by 5% back in 2016 and voted for Joe Biden by 5% back in 2020. We go to Chesterfield County, a historically Republican county that voted for Mitt Romney by 7, voted for Joe Biden by like 7 as well. You go to somewhere like Loudoun County, for example. This was a county that voted for get this, George W. Bush back in 2004, and it voted for Joe Biden by 25%. So, of course, Joe Biden and the Democrats were able to do phenomenally in some of the suburban regions. However, this time round, it does look like that Republicans are gaining in some of the rural areas. For example, Highland County, this was a county that actually only gave Romney a 4% victory back in 2012. Trump won the county by 44% back in 2020. You're also likely going to see some suburban reversion in areas like Loudoun County, Chesterfield County, and the aforementioned Virginia Beach County. With all these things considered, it could seem like that the state of Virginia is going to be much more in play for the Republican Party in 2024. I do not expect President Trump to end up investing a significant amount of money into the state or a lot of time, but nevertheless, Virginia will probably be decided right now by around a 3 to 4% margin, just like the state of Minnesota or another lean characterization. Now I'm going to just get Nebraska 2nd out of the way here. This was a district that voted for Joe Biden by 6. It's based in around the Nebraska 2nd district, based in Omaha, as well as the Douglas County and some of the more Republican areas like Sarpy County or Sanders County. But nevertheless, this is a district that is trending blue. If you just look at the Omaha based region, right, Douglas County trended 8.9% more Democratic than 2016. Sarpy County trended 10% more Democratic. You take that all into consideration, I still give Kamala Harris a lean margin in Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. Now going to the Rust Belt 3, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, the 3 states likely to decide the election. First off, in the state of Wisconsin, if you look at Wisconsin polling, you can say that Kamala Harris is doing quite well. However, again, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. still holds a larger share of the vote than Kamala Harris's lead. Additionally, back in 2020, polls in the state of Wisconsin were absolutely atrocious. Joe Biden was up on election day by 8.4%, and Joe Biden only won the state by 0.63%. That's about a 7.8% shift. Essentially, the state of Wisconsin, and as well as a lot of the presidential polling there, has been historically quite inaccurate. I just simply cannot believe that, again, Kamala Harris is actually up in the state by 4%. It's just not very realistic, considering the fact that Joe Biden had essentially everything going right for him. A lot of Americans consider the economy to be quite poor in 2020. There was the COVID issue. There were a lot of issues that favored Democrats, and even then, Joe Biden was only able to win the state by a fraction of 1%. The polling numbers simply do not make sense for this election. Additionally, I do expect that Donald Trump will have some type of improvement in some of the rural areas like he has always did. Now, if you look at some of the trending Republican areas on this map, you can see Ron Kind's former district. This is a working class region, traditionally votes for Democrats by heavy margins. This time around, though, it looks like that this area has been trending more Republican, and I expect Donald Trump to continuously improve in some of those regions. Additionally, I expect Trump to be able to do better in some of the wild counties compared to how he performed back in 2020. For example, Waukesha County, this is a Republican stronghold. Donald Trump did not do well in that area because Joe Biden heavily campaigned around Waukesha. He was able to make the argument that he was someone of a more moderate Democrat, an argument that Kamala Harris simply does not have. Additionally, this is an area that traditionally votes for Republicans by much greater margins. For example, back in 2018, despite the fact that Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin won re-election by 11%, she was only able to carry 37% of the vote here. Joe Biden actually carried 39% of the vote. So I expect Kamala Harris to be actually running below Tammy Baldwin's number and getting somewhere like 36% of the vote in an area like Waukesha County. I simply believe that Donald Trump will be able to make a lot of inroads in some of these more exurban areas, as well as some of the rural areas. I believe that Kamala Harris will probably be able to at least run at Biden's numbers in some of the more urban areas, but considering the fact that Donald Trump only has to make up around 20,000 votes, I believe it's more than sufficient for Donald Trump to simply improve in the rurals as well as some of the wild counties to be able to make up that 20% margin. Wisconsin is currently leading Republican. Now, of course, with the state of Wisconsin filled in, Donald Trump has already clinched the presidency at 278 electoral college votes to Kamala Harris at 220. But let's see exactly how far Donald Trump could end up going. First off, now we go to the state of Michigan. Currently, Michigan does have Kamala Harris in the lead in polling by 3.4%. However, again, I do expect this to be kind of like an oversampling of the Democratic vote share. That is because the state has generally overestimated Democrats in polling. In 2020, Joe Biden was leading the state by 8%, just to end up winning the state by 2.8% in the general election. That's about a Democratic overestimation by around 5%. Additionally, in 2024, we see that Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s number is still factored in. When he's removed from the equation, I expect some of these numbers to end up tightening. Ultimately, though, I do expect the state to be probably the most competitive state in 2024. If you look at the state of Michigan right now, it's a state that voted for Joe Biden by 2.8%. However, you can see that Donald Trump probably has several areas in which he could definitely make up a substantial improvement. First off, I certainly do not expect Kamala Harris to be able to do as well as Joe Biden did in Detroit County. That's simply because a lot of these younger voters, as well as Arab Americans living in Dearborn, are simply frustrated with the Democratic Party. This is not just something to do with Kamala Harris. Essentially, most Democrats are just going to end up underperforming in this area because, as you see in the Michigan Democratic primary, there's a lot of voters voting uncommitted. They're frustrated with the Democrats in general. These are voters who heavily voted for Joe Biden in 2020, who may not vote at all for Kamala Harris or Joe Biden in 2024. So I do expect certainly some drop-off in Detroit. Additionally, someone like Kamala Harris, who is of a racial minority. Now, if you look at two areas that I believe Kamala Harris will end up underperforming Joe Biden, those are some of the more white working class areas as well as the more white collar areas around the state. For example, in the state of Michigan, what you're going to see is that two specific counties like Kent County as well as Oakland County, who combine for roughly 20% of the population in the state of Michigan, they're going to heavily trend to the Republican Party. Joe Biden had this unique white working class and white collar appeal that really resonated with a lot of voters in some of these areas, and as a result, he was able to make significant improvements in both of those regions who are densely populated. However, in 2024, I just do not believe that Kamala Harris will be having the same appeal. Additionally, in an area like Macomb County, more white working class, this will probably also trend several points to the Republican Party, and again, this is also a county home to a population of almost 1 million residents. Finally, again, Trump will still do a lot better than he did in 2020 in some of the rural areas. When all that being considered, I believe it will be enough for someone like Donald Trump to be able to erase Kamala Harris's 155,000 vote advantage to come into this election and end up winning it by about a 0.2% margin over Kamala Harris. I believe this is extremely close, but with, again, RFK Jr. dropping out of the election, I believe it is certainly an achievable goal for the Donald Trump and J.D. Vance ticket. Finally, in the state of Pennsylvania. Again, I do believe Pennsylvania will be a state that is pretty favorable for the Republican Party in 2024 for several reasons. Firstly, you're still going to see someone like Donald Trump be able to do very well in the rural areas, run up the numbers there. Additionally, Trump was shot in Butler County, Pennsylvania. This was an area that Joe Biden ended up improving in back in 2020, but I expect a lot of these areas where, again, Trump holds a rally, you're going to see higher turnout in those regions. Especially in an area like Butler, where Trump got shot, you're going to see a lot of sympathy for Donald Trump and a lot more votes in favor of him. Additionally, someone like Kamala Harris simply will not be able to do as well in some of the white working class areas like Erie County. She'll probably lose it to Donald Trump by roughly 2% margin. This was a county, of course, that Joe Biden was able to carry thanks to his unique white working class appeal. Additionally, I just don't believe that Kamala Harris will be able to do Joe Biden numbers in some of the areas like Chester County or Bucks County. these, especially Bucks County, is a more, white working class area. It's an area with a lower median income, and I just believe that this is the type of county where Donald Trump will be able to make some inroads. Of course, I think that Kamala Harris will still do very well in Montgomery, in Delaware, and Philadelphia, but I just do not believe that that will be enough. The state of Pennsylvania right now tilts to the Republican Party by roughly a 1% margin. Now we go to the final two states on this map, the states of New Hampshire and Maine. But before that, Donald Trump is already at 312 electoral college votes, while Kamala Harris is still stuck at 220. Now going to the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a state that voted for Joe Biden by 7% margin back in 2020. Joe Biden was able to significantly outperform Hillary Clinton virtually all around the New England region. Now expect the state to be more competitive in 2024. The state lives by its label of a live free or die state and is very volatile in presidential politics. It does have, of course, a Republican governor, Chris Sununu. Now, right now, I do still expect Kamala Harris to win the state just because it's more white college educated, which is kind of like the demographic in which Donald Trump is not doing very well in just as a general candidate himself. So New Hampshire right now is still going to be in the tilt blue column. Now finally, in the state of Maine. Maine is a state that is quite interesting in terms of polling. We see that some of the earlier polls had this race as a dead heat. Then a poll came out with Harris plus 9, and the most recent poll actually has Harris up 70% across the state. Now, the state of Maine is notoriously difficult to poll because it is very rural, and results have been very off in polling there. In fact, it's quite common for a state to be off by double digits in the actual results compared to the polling. In 2020, of course, Joe Biden was able to improve it in the first district, however, he did not really make significant inroads in the second, which is the more redder district that historically has voted Democratic, but has trended significantly towards the Republican Party. I do expect Trump to continuously make significant inroads in the second district and perhaps cut Democratic margins in some of the areas in the first. In the more competitive areas like Goldaccock County or Lincoln County or like Waldo County, Knox County, right? These more moderate areas, but I expect Cumberland counties to still be heavily in the blue column. Ultimately, though, the state of Maine, I'm still going to give it to Kamala Harris here by about a tilt margin just because it voted for Biden by 9 points back in 2020. Now, in a nutshell, to summarize up this video, even before RFK Jr.'s announcement in favor of endorsing Donald Trump, I was already anticipating a Trump victory in the Electoral College map. However, this announcement has essentially consolidated Trump's support in some of the more rural areas because he doesn't really have to worry about really getting his base to vote for him because RFK Jr. is someone who is a more moderate candidate, someone who, has been historically a Democrat, and someone who's taking some votes away from Donald Trump, has now essentially relinquished his spot in the presidential election and decided to drop out. This is certainly an announcement that will end up helping Donald Trump, and at this point in time, I still give Donald Trump 312 electoral college votes, and Kamala Harris with 226, despite what some of the numbers in polling, as well as some other political pundits may end up suggesting. Anyways, if you liked this video, please consider subscribing. 98% of you guys are not subscribed to my channel currently, and I would appreciate it if you could simply end up clicking that subscribe button, which costs you no money and only 2 seconds to do so. Thank you for watching, have a nice day. Goodbye.